This is the Michael Bryan Show. Hi everyone, welcome back to the show, and today I am joined with Kristen McAlister, who's a leadership strategist, business owner, and co-owner of Cerius Executives. So we are talking about leading, but from the team perspective, creating the best team that you can for your company and for your goals. Kristen, thanks so much for taking the time and joining me today.
I'm excited to be part of the discussion, Michael.
Now, I know that when we talk about leadership, very often we can talk about the leader, how to lead better, but I know you're very, very big on the team behind the leadership or how to find the right people. So I'm curious about how you came to that realization that it was about the team itself.
15 years of working with business owners. They're running hard and they're just not always working towards what they actually want. And from working with hundreds of business owners and businesses filling leadership gaps, we found that on the leadership team, when we get the right people doing the right things at the right time, everything gets easier. It's easier for the business, easier for the team, and the business owner actually then gets to lead the business rather than running the business.
I suppose that's the balance, because a lot of business owners might still feel like they're having to keep one hand on the wheel the entire time, whereas I suppose having the right people would mean they can just concentrate on their thing.
Absolutely. And that's what we find so many cases and discussions as we ask questions and get deeper and learn about the business owner and why they started the business to begin with and what they wanted to build. They end up realizing they built more of a cage than a business because everything in the business has ended up relying on them, revolving around them. And most owners started a business because they were really good at one thing, not necessarily because they went to school or grew up in a family business and they know how to run a business.
I guess as well that it comes down to the team would help them achieve their why in some ways. Would you agree with that as well? Where once you set it up right, then you can start to look at achieving the goal that you set out to achieve.
That's the number one thing to focus on. And the first place that I start with any business owner is understand. I call it the finish line. We always say start at the finish line. It's Covey's begin with the end in mind. Someone will say, I want to build a $10 million business. I want to build it to 50 million and sell it. We start with why is that? And I call it the 5-year-old game of why. Continue to do why until they either get really frustrated or they have that aha moment. What do we want to grow it to and why? And what do we want our lives to look like? Because as a business owner, it's tough to separate the business from our personal lives. Those two are so intertwined. But once we really understand and are clear on what we're building this business for and that purpose, that why, it becomes clear then what do we need our leadership team to accomplish? What are those outcomes? And there is nothing more freeing and motivating for a leadership team than being clear on what outcome do we need to produce.
Would that have anything to do with the kinds of people that you were hiring? So the way my brain thinks about it would be if you wanted to sell the business, then you would likely need someone that could do the owner's job. It's like some kind of CEO, sort of replace the owner, create some kind of senior leadership structure so that the owner can step away.
Absolutely. And whether they're looking to build kind of enterprise value, I call it, for themselves or for the next owner, really depends on then who we're going to bring in with what expertise. If they are looking to exit the company at some point, yes, we need to make it non-owner dependent. We need to bring in a team that can run the company that may include a general manager, a president, or in our case, a lot of times an interim president who can help the owner figure out what do they enjoy doing? What do they not enjoy doing? What are they good at? what are they doing? But they are terrible at it and they know it and they hate doing it. And start to decouple those activities from how the business needs to operate going forward. That's a very different expertise to help an owner transition to more of an actual CEO role versus CEO, CFO, president, and all the other hats that we wear versus someone who's going to help them then increase the enterprise value and prepare to sell, or someone who's then going to help them turn it into a lifestyle business. And we're going to focus on profits and giving the owner the lifestyle they want and the team running it for them. Those are different executive and leadership expertise. And I would put different individuals on the leadership team at different points of time for them.
I suppose then the main thing is the business owner needs to really understand what they want. What do they want to get out of it? What's the goal for them? Otherwise, I guess you've got loads of examples of this going wrong, Kristen, where you're hiring the people for the wrong goals.
We call it the skeletons in the closet. You sit down with a business owner and usually starts with a job description of here's what I need them to accomplish. And they all look the same across thousands of companies. But as we start to understand, why do they need this position in the first place? Is it needed full-time? Is it needed part-time? Is it temporary? What problem are we solving for? And we start to really peel back. Well, the reason why they're hiring that CFO is because we get this a lot. They've had 3 CFOs in the last 4 years. We start to really dig into it. They had 3 CFOs in the last 4 years because they had the wrong profile. They were bringing in a CFO who was really great at building a team. They were fantastic at building it from scratch. And then the company evolved and outgrew them, or in reality, that business owner wanted to sell in 2 to 3 years, and the CFO had no M&A experience, had no experience transitioning from cash to accrual. They didn't have that underlying skill set to actually accomplish what the business owner needed. Business owners thought, well, if I get a CFO who's worked in my type of company, in my industry, I'm set. And after 3 misfires, they'll hit the pause button and figure out, why am I actually bringing the CFO in? And there's case study after case study, you're right, I always say, we don't hire the wrong people. They're not a bad fit. We're hiring for the wrong job. We've got to get clear on what we want them to accomplish. Once we do that, every single thing any business owner hates doing, job interviews, job descriptions, performance evaluations, all of that goes away. And it just becomes an ongoing routine. And where we, in comparison to why we hired them, the problem we're solving for, and the outcomes, every decision starts to make itself, Michael. It's incredible.
So how would someone go about trying to fill in these gaps then? Because you mentioned the right people in the right places at the right times. It's making me think that this is a forever changing and evolving thing. So how would someone ever decide?
It is evolving with the expertise that you need at what time. So we start with the owner's finish line. I always say it's where the company goal, where their goals for the company meet their personal values. Do I want to build a $50 million company working no more than 50 hours a week, or at any personal cost? Do I want to make this my first company that I build? I want to sell it at $5 million and then roll that into the next company. I want to own 3 or 4 companies, or I want a lifestyle business. I just want something that's going to give me X amount of income for this lifestyle. Once we understand that and we look at what outcomes are needed from the company and who they have on their team, then it's a lot easier to assess, do we have the right people? Who do we need to upskill in order for them to accomplish their goal or the outcome we need them to accomplish? Like increased customer retention by 20%, increased customer acquisition by 15%. Do they have the skills, abilities, and say willingness to accomplish it? Then do we need that ongoing long term? Do we need to put in some structure and some strategy? And we just need someone for a short period of time to do that in our sales department. Once that is accomplished, they turn it over to the long-term team and we shift and say, well, now our sales are so great. Our engine is going. We're breaking operations. So let's figure out what we need in operations and let's put our resources there. It's an agile leadership team. So we've got who we need longer term because we need to own that longer term. And then we supplement in what we need in the short term for a period of time. Maybe it's upskilling some of the current leadership because they were employees number 2 and 3. And we're able to adjust that more easily than if we've got 5 full-time executives.
So it sounds like there's a real art in having to be agile and having to constantly change and adapt. What kind of thought process does it take, do you think, to be able to do that? Because I imagine there are so many that would be a bit too in their own head or possibly a little bit too tunnel vision to be able to think like this.
Once they've got clarity on that finish line, then those decisions that they're making are in pursuit of that. It really takes away a lot of the guesswork. It takes away a lot of the hesitation because it's easy to map out how we're going to get them to that finish line and the different adjustments that we need to make with the team or how we're going to upskill the team along the way. And once you understand what it's in pursuit of down the road, not the 6-month goal, not the 12-month goal, but down the road, and we can see it's going to take maybe 18 months to 3 years for some of the initiatives, a lot of that hesitation goes away because we're not making major changes. We're not ripping any band-aids off. We're not completely pivoting the company overnight. It's little adjustments and evolving. And once the owner has the clarity on that and the team has the clarity, they know what any change adjustment is being made in pursuit of, and we can craft that narrative around it. It really is a game changer in how we lead our business versus having the business run us.
I suppose there are a lot of business owners that do in some ways give themselves a job where they've got clients and staff and this, that and the other that are requiring their time on a daily basis, and that, yeah, it started off great, but now it's like a golden handcuff situation where it starts off great, but now they are prevented from making other decisions because of what happened in the past.
Michael, and that's the number one conversation that we have with business owners myself as a business owner as well. I remember a time when I was working until 1 o'clock in the morning. I remember when I was working weekends and I didn't feel like I had to do it all, but I felt like I didn't have any other place to go or any other way to do it. And I kept saying, well, 2 more months and it'll just get better. 2 more months, that 2-month mark, turned into 2 years later until you hit that breaking point or that burnout point where it just has to change. And I find in all the work I've done, it's probably about buckets of 1/3. 1/3 really want that freedom back in their lives. They want more control over how they live their lives, spending time with their families, being there for the little league games. And they're willing to make some of the hard decisions in some cases, or do the work over, 18-month period of time to get there. You've got 1/3 who want that. They're just stuck in decision paralysis and they really don't want to do that hard work and change. And then you've got the 1/3 that they're good working 80 hours a week. They're good with how they're running their business. They're good with however anyone else may see it or want it differently for them. They're fine. They have no motivation to change whatsoever. And there's not, they're not going to reach out to anyone for help. And that's great.
You mentioned that it's something that you may have got some experience in. I'm curious about your story. How did you get started in this? Did you run businesses or companies before you got into the consulting side?
I didn't. In fact, I always said that I was never going to be an entrepreneur. I never wanted to own a business. I spent the first half of my career actually working in someone else's business, building it. And I loved that concept of building. And we built it from 5 million to probably close to 50 million almost overnight through some large contracts. And then it sold. And I did some consulting. I was on the market back in that wonderful 2008 timeframe. And I found this concept of interim and fractional leadership. And I realized companies don't need someone to come in and tell them what to do. They need someone to come in and show them how to do it differently, how there's an easier way. They need someone to bring a toolbox in. And I would have given anything for that as a VP of operations in a super high growth environment. So I fell in love with the concept of how do we help businesses grow in a much easier cash flow way. And that's where then a couple of years after that, got the opportunity to buy Cerius Executives after working there as a fractional COO for a period of time. And we've been building it ever since.
So is that what interim and fractional leadership is, where you bring someone in on a short-term basis that helps run things differently or bring different ways of seeing problems to help?
Anywhere along that range. Interim, as you know, from the UK is typically used when we lose someone on a full-time basis. It's going to take a while to hire. We've got the garden leave. We need that position filled. In the US, more times than not, that position is not left in the best of situations. So we've got to work with the team. We've got to work with the ownership and figure out what does this position need to be longer term. There's some cleanup to do. Most interims are either builders or they're fixers. So we've got to understand, is this a fix-it situation or a build situation? And then they're in there to set the next longer term person up for success. Or possibly there's an M&A. We really don't need a full-time COO up until about a year before we want to sell. And then we may bring someone in on an interim basis to help us do all the things that the next buyer might do. We're going to do them and increase the enterprise value. Then you've got what's really skyrocketed in the US is that fractional executive. They're in there on a part-time basis. It could be 4 hours a week, 3 days a week, and they're there for a longer term basis. We don't need a full-time VP of sales or a full-time CFO, but we do need one. And it may just be for 10% of the workload. Then let's just have them in there for 10% of the time and not make our team stretch beyond their capabilities. And meanwhile, they're side by side working and mentoring the team, asking those tough questions and showing them what it's like to be an aligned leadership team. It's just incredible to be able to get that high level, seasoned expertise. They're seeing multiple companies on any given year, taking all those experiences and then helping any one company. It's like seeing the forest through the trees. We didn't know what we didn't know, and we didn't know how we should be operating until someone showed us. It's not always intuitive.
It sounds like that'd be a really useful thing. You know, if you don't have the budget for anything, but you need the person, you need the position, I imagine for some companies that can mean the difference between success, failure, keeping afloat, to having to essentially close the company altogether.
And we've done that a number of times. We've been brought in where there was a 6-month run rate on cash. The CFO was going through the process of we may need to declare bankruptcy. And really, a part-time president, 3 days a week, came in for a period of time and did not pivot the company. They were still making the same type of product to the same type of customer in the same industry, but made some pivotal tweaks and adjustments within the company and how the team worked together. And within 2 months, they were break even. Within 4 months, they were making money. And about 3 years later, the owner was able to sell it for a very good price. Without having that experience of going through that, most of us, we just don't know. We think we have all the answers. We don't necessarily have asking the right questions. When you look being able to bring in, whether it's a part-time HR leader who's going to help you take the talent you have, your number one asset, and what we're spending our money on, and help skill them in the right way and look and see what do we need to do a year from now, or decrease our turnover by 20%, which is one of the most costly things for a company. It really is a game changer for some companies in how we invest our money and the return we get for it.
So let's talk about trying to find these people then, because it sounds like outside of obviously going to you guys for the people and possibly helping iron out some of the kinks, but what if they can't actually see the wood for the trees? What if they've got their blinders on? What if they're having a hard time actually making the decisions, which I suppose in some ways they need to feel like they're making the decisions as well? How do you find these people? How do you work out what goes where?
There's a lot of options and a lot of talent that's more than happy to loan it out on a part-time or an interim basis. I always say though, 85% of getting it right and doing the work is getting the clarity on who we need. So even if our friend down the street, our fellow business owner on the golf course has a fantastic fractional executive that they've worked with and have done a great job, it doesn't mean that they're the right person for your company and for what you need accomplished. So work with either a leadership strategist, a business coach, someone to help get that clarity right on where do we want our lives to be, where do we want to take the company, what outcomes do we need, and what expertise. Because once we get that expertise and that profile right, there's a lot of opportunity out there in the market, whether through the job boards, networking, asking around to get any number of individuals who'd be willing to do it. But now we have that benchmark of here's what we need accomplished, who's done it 5 and 6 times and who has a methodology for it. It gives us the questions. It gives us that business discussion. It's not an interview. We're going into a business discussion with them. Once we have that, that's only about 10% of it. And then your last 5% is just integrating them in to the team and the communication. Get 85%. Let's get clear on what we need to begin with and that profile. And as you said at the beginning, why? For what purpose? Every other decision, every other part of the process starts to fall into place.
Do you find then that there are any, let's say, learning curves, or often I've seen it described as a hockey stick moment where things tend to take off when you bring these people in? But what happens if there are any difficulties there? So let's say you bring somebody in, you found the right person, but then there are some things that aren't quite right. What tends to happen there when they're trying to integrate into the company?
First, start with, is there too much of a culture? A really good interim or fractional is going to adjust to the culture. Really good executive will adjust to the culture, be able to respect what's there. But sometimes there's hidden personality tweaks. It's just not right. Those are the first ones that we're then going to be quick to, this assignment isn't right. We didn't think about this. And there's typically no notice needed. We're going to start over and try this again. Is it that things have shifted 3 months into it? The reason why we hired the individual or contracted them 3 months ago, and you always write that down. Here's the situation. Here's what we want accomplished. The entire business may change, and those skill sets and that expertise isn't needed anymore. So it's kind of a process of elimination, or is it, as I may do as a business owner, I found a shiny object over here. I asked them to start working on the shiny object. They did, and we completely forgot about the reason why we brought them in. And our frustration is growing because they're not able to do both within the time period. So then it's a communication and a reset and scope creep. So process of elimination. Where did we get off? Was it on the path? Was it on the original profile? Or in some cases, just personality and culture just don't mix. It's less important on a contract basis than on a full-time basis, but sometimes you just never know.
Do you have any examples of that where maybe it hasn't worked and then another example of it working?
That was very, very early on. And one of probably the clearest and cleanest situations we found is the executive needs to be able to fit the culture of the owner and CEO more than the culture of the company. Because as you know, those are sometimes two very different things. Because if they're not able to match and step and communicate, and sometimes buffer the owner CEO, they're not going to get very far. And we placed a CFO at a government contractor years ago, and it was oil and water. It just was not working. 2 months into it, it was clear as day. We brought in someone else where if you put their resume side by side, they were the same person. But that second one, we matched to that CEO and his personality, his culture, his way of working, and someone who could then translate and adapt all of that to the rest of the team. So we saw that's where the conflict came about. And 2 years later, he was still a fractional CFO and created a lot of success for that company.
I find that interesting where it was like the person you brought in was a better match for the CEO, like whether they got on, the personalities didn't clash. What lessons did you learn from that in terms of not just the person, but finding out about how to integrate them?
Yeah, it's a lot of backward facing questions and digging into what have you tried in the past? Why did it not work? What were some of the business challenges? Why do you think those didn't work? And it's almost like some behavioral questions to understand the things that the CEO has already tried, why they didn't work, what they wanted to accomplish, what do they think some of those obstacles are. And you can start to pick out patterns or more aware of those patterns through each of the discussions and the conversation to understand what type of, almost say, a work style or approach, less about personality. They can hit it off because they belong to the same golf club. Their kids are in the same school system. They know all the same people, but work style wise, it's still oil and water. So a CEO that loves to run fast, they want it done yesterday, and they're a shoot from the hip, needs a different work style and approach than, say, an executive who's going to be very methodical, likes to research, likes to approach it with a game plan before doing anything. That's not going to work with the shiny object, fast moving, let's do it yesterday. They need to be able to talk it through, understand, and almost manage up to that CEO versus the methodical, we call it the scholar type executive, is just going to frustrate them to no end.
So with that then, Kristen, what would you say were the most important things? So obviously they get on, the personalities are fine, they go to the same school, same club, but their work style doesn't fit one of the things that the CEO needs to happen. That sounds like a way of operating and being a priority, but what would be the real things that make people stick into a company?
That's a great question. The alignment on outcomes is probably one of the top ones. As you look at purpose and why and understanding what is the CEO building it for and being able to communicate and see eye to eye and respect each other. That's the leadership team with the CEO and any executive we've put in. One of the top reasons for leaving a company that I find after interviewing probably a couple thousand executives over the years, you've got three reasons. Either they were laid off, the company moved, relocated, M&A, or a new CEO came in, the business owner changed the direction of the company, and they just didn't agree with it. They couldn't get on board, and they were not aligned with it. Once there is not that alignment or respect to get aligned with it, it's not going to work.
It sounds like after the thousands of interviews and talking to executives that you've built up quite a way of noticing patterns and things that
Yeah.
work and things that don't. So you mentioned the alignment side, you've mentioned some of the things that can come up, but are there any others? Are there any patterns that you've noticed around what works and what doesn't work in terms of not just leadership, in terms of when someone's in there, how do they stay in there, but finding the right person? So what patterns have you noticed?
In this current time and environment, I think one of the biggest patterns is the ability to be agile. And I've talked to a number of executives who step in on an interim and fractional basis and asked as they're helping to hire people and helping to bring on the leadership team or hiring the company, what are some of the traits that they're looking for? And right now it's agile. It's being able to be flexible and adjust to the operating environment. So when you look at patterns in having discussions with individuals and you dig into their background, and most of the responses are outward facing or pointing the blame elsewhere, or, well, this happened in the economy and what else were we going to do? You can see that every time there was a roadblock, they just stopped and turned around and went the other way, or they just gave up. Versus those, I love getting into how did you overcome that? Or what roadblocks did you hit? And how did you go around them, get past them, scale them? And as they talk about that, that resilience comes in, an ability to adjust to the situation without placing blame on how it came out. Someone once told me, be hard on the project or the problem, not on the people. So looking for those individuals who can focus on, here was the problem, the project, here's where it went wrong, here's how we got past it. Our sales dropped by 20%. Here's what we acted quickly on. Here's where we got everyone aligned to, and here's how we executed on it. That is where I see executives really diverge in those who can step into just about any situation and be successful versus those where it may be a hit or a miss.
I'd be curious about how you actually build that skill. Have you been involved in that? Any experience with that? How do you suppose the agility can be improved?
That is a fantastic question, Michael. Some of it is just it's experience, it's at bats. It's the more in if it's not native or intuitive to you, because I do believe that some individuals just have that, whether it's from how they were raised, they've grown up, they've had to build that resilience gene or that resilience tool in a lot of cases. I think the more situations that I've seen individuals confronted with, faced, different industries, different types of ownership, different challenges, and they were able to get past them. I think that absolutely, because once you get past it, you realize, oh, it wasn't as big of a roadblock as we thought. Let's see what happens next time. And you also start to build that curiosity of let's ask questions. Are we solving for the right problem? I see that a lot with really great executives as they talk about here was what we were trying and realized we were solving for the wrong thing. They got curious and just started asking question after question and realized we're going down the wrong path. That's why we keep hitting all those roadblocks. See this one over here? That one's got an 80-mile-an-hour speed limit. No, nothing in the path. Let's try that one instead. And I think we're going to solve the problem and not run into all those roadblocks. So I do absolutely think that it can be learned. There's a lot of self-awareness and self-reflection that also is involved in that, especially once you get to the leadership level.
It sounds like that curiosity must play a part as well. Like the idea of let's try and solve a different problem and maybe we can avoid everything over here. It sounds like, I think there's a quote where if you're cutting down a tree, you spend the first day sharpening the axe. You really have a go at the actual planning part first to make sure that you're doing the right thing. And then that usually saves you so much time further on down the road.
And that's why we talk about 85% of the time is on that clarity, that preparation. I remember when I started doing software development, Michael, and someone explained to me, and they explained it to me, and I didn't believe it until it happened. For every dollar you spend in the planning stage, you will spend $10 to change that in the development stage, and you'll spend $100 to change it once you get to deployment. So the concept of get our clarity in place, then strategy, then planning, then execution, versus when we walk into situations as we understand how did it get to the point it is, as we were just executing. We are executing after executing after executing, and it turns out we're executing on 10 different initiatives versus what's the one thing we need to get right and put what few resources we have on that.
How would you suppose you strike the balance though? Because there will be some people that may stay at the clarity and planning stage, let's just say a little bit too long before they then start to do the work and get the ball rolling. At what point do you decide to push the button on it and get things going?
That is where we want to surround ourselves with diversity. And that's diversity of thought, diversity of skills. There's a great tool out there. Lencioni's Working Genius, which goes through and can evaluate the team as to who's great on the vision part, the strategy part, the planning part, the execution, and getting it to not just to the 80-yard line. How do we get it to the goal line? And having those various individuals, not just on the leadership team, but in our company, and that we're working within our genius, we're taking the friction out and we're working in our natural state of being, which is why as the owner, anytime we finish something and we are tired, we're exhausted, we really shouldn't be working on that. We are not in our natural state of being. And there are people much better to do it, especially with all of the online platforms, with the agile leadership models that are out there where we can just borrow and pay for what we need accomplished. There's no reason why we should be pushing that rock up a hill and working outside of our genius, outside of our natural tendencies. We want that variability. I'm well aware that I love starting new things, and I've had to discipline myself. I can only test 3 things at a time. And once something is successful, I could care less about getting it to the goal line. I want to get to that 80-yard line and pass it off to someone else. So being honest with ourselves as to where we are best at and what gives us that energy, and then finding the diversity and really digging into who loves being in the red zone and getting it across the goal line. who is absolutely best at that, but then don't get frustrated when they don't want to be up, they don't want to be on the sidelines figuring out what calls we're going to, they don't like the strategy. They're not even the best at the planning process, but they can execute relentlessly. Once we get the clarity, we know who and what we need for that strategy, that planning, that execution, and have a little bit of each of them, then we've got the right people doing the right things in the right places, Michael.
It sounds to me anyway like being self-aware is important. You need to know where you work best, where are the gaps, when do you like to, as you said, pass things off to somebody else. What other skills would you say leadership needed? So within the company, when they're deciding on whether it's fractional, interim, short term, whatever it happens to be, what skills make a good leadership team for then the right people to enter it, knowing that there'll be a benefit?
I'll take the opposite. Where I see the biggest challenges and things fall apart, people get stuck, or we waste the most amount of resources is when we are not focused and we're not consistent. So having a team of renegades and people who just love figuring stuff out on the fly means that we are going to reinvent the wheel every single day and end up with 15 different wheels at the end of the week, none of which are going to get any vehicle anywhere. Versus those where consistency, here's where we're focused, but we're going to figure out the most repeatable, scalable way of doing something. And we're going to do that consistently day in and day out until part of it doesn't work. And then we're going to adjust it. We see it's easy for high achievers to want to continue to jump in and solve the problems, solve that problem of the day or figure it out along the way versus working with the team and figuring out which way can we do it in the most consistent, repeatable way. And when we get to consistent and repeatable and scalable, that's where, as an owner, there's a light at the end of the tunnel where the company can operate without me. The company can grow without me, can scale without me because there is systems and processes in place. And we always want everyone in the company to have that mindset. And if they hate it, it drives them absolutely nuts. Then we put them on a team with system, process, consistent individuals.
It made me giggle actually when you said that all the renegades are making 24 wheels every time and none of them actually work. It sounds like the sort of thing where you're spinning so many plates and eventually you're just going to either drop all of them because you're spending all your time trying to keep them all up, or you focus on the handful and you just accept that the rest are going to fall.
Absolutely. And what happens when those plates start to drop, especially in a growing company or a high growth? What that looks like is we run out of money. We just don't have any more cash because we burned through it spinning those plates. Because each one of those plates is different initiatives, different people, different resources.
So it sounds like the sort of thing where you've got to be able to adjust. That seems to be the common theme, is you've got to be able to adjust when something changes. You've got to be able to move with it. Are there any initial thoughts on when you hit the roadblock or the fork in the road, what prompts or assessments or something that when you hit that roadblock, what sort of things would you say could help people get past them?
Those roadblocks become such a barrier in business growth. I've come up with strategies. There's a couple different strategies. And once you think through the strategies and what strategy works best for you or your organization, then it becomes a little easier because you're not starting from scratch. So I hit that roadblock, and do I need an alternative path? Is this the current path? Like what problems are we solving that were caused by the original problem? Let's go back and solve that original problem. Rather than continuing to go down that wrong path, be tied to the destination, not the path. We may need to be able to be innovative and look outside what other paths exist. to be able to get us to that destination. The other one is we're not always meant to climb every single mountain. Just because the rock is there doesn't mean we have to climb it. Is there a way around it? Are we doing things because that's the way we've always done it, or because the customer keeps asking us and we can't say no to the customer? Do we go around it? Or is that roadblock behind us? And again, that self-limiting belief that, well, this is the company that my grandfather built. This is the way it's always been done. This is our number one marquee product, and there's no option of changing that. Those are self-limiting beliefs and end up being these boulders, that roadblocks behind us, and we're dragging it with us. Especially we see this with generation 2 and generation 3. Figure out which strategy works best for you. Evaluate the strategy for that roadblock, and then it becomes easier to figure out what do we need to do and get the team going that way. Because if you're constantly, there could be 100 permutations of it. Let's narrow it down to 3. And then once we have that 3, there's probably only 2 or 3 options that we need to evaluate.
What I find quite interesting about that is being able to work out which is the correct problem that you're trying to solve is very important. So outside of just essentially reducing down your options, how else do people do it? So with all the companies that you worked with, I imagine there are different strategies for working out which problem is the right one to solve.
I print it out on a banner. I work with teams, get every single person in the company asking the question, what problem are we solving for? So anytime someone comes to the owner, someone leadership, a manager, to a team member, says, I got a problem, here's what I'm thinking. Even if they give a solution to that problem, ask the question, what problem are we solving for? If that is implemented, what can we expect as a result? So then we've got a couple of different milestones or gates. Let's hit the pause button. Are we solving for the right problem? Sometimes you realize, okay, what I was trying to do was reload the fax machine. That fax machine did not have enough paper. I've spent the last 2 hours finding the fax paper that machine takes, and then they can't get it here for 2 weeks. The problem we're solving for is getting this information from here over to there. Why are we trying to figure out how to get the fax paper here sooner? And we end up doing that every single day in our lives and in our business. I call it chasing the squirrel down the rabbit hole. Get out of the hole, take a deep breath, and ask, what am I actually trying to accomplish here? What problem should I be solving for? And it's amazing how quickly we can get that clarity and that redirection. So if everyone is asking, what are we solving for? It might be a problem, a challenge, or an opportunity. Just question it.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kristen. I think that's definitely going to help people really make sure they're not wasting their time either, because there's nothing quite as bad as wasting their time on things that aren't that important. So for those that would like to enter your world, possibly get to know you a bit better, how could they do that? Have you got social media, websites, that sort of thing?
Go on to Google Kristen McAlister, or our company website, CeriusExecutives.com. That's CERIUS executives.com.
Thanks so much for being a guest on the show. Those that are listening, feel free to subscribe, share the show, tell others, and also leave a review wherever you are listening into your podcasts. Kristen, I've enjoyed this. It's been great, and I look forward to keeping in touch. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Michael.